might not be enough for everybody.
I've got a
to
few
share
more.
now. We can get more copies if you want after.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'll give you a little bit of background. I love a handout. I was a biology teacher for a long time. I taught high school biology for 15 years, and then moved into a behavior program, so a balanced program like what you guys have here. And I did that for a couple of years, and now I'm doing this. So that's kind of my background. The reason that I got into this stuff is my oldest son, he's got autism and ADHD and you know the deal with that. And he had really, really severe behavior challenges and still continues to. So for Paul and I, so Paul's my husband, as we were sort of going through this process with him, with that autism diagnosis, we wound up getting access to resources, and one of them was a parent management class, and it was based in the field of applied behavior analysis. And that parenting course, with no hyperbole intended, really did change our lives. We went through sort of having this 3-year-old who, and I don't consider myself a bad parent, I don't consider Paul, we both were raised by good parents, but he was beyond our skill set, and we really didn't know what to do with him. And so then all of a sudden we got this training, and it's not that it made everything perfect, but it sort of gave us this framework in order to understand what behavior is and to be able to provide him with what he needed in order to sort of be successful. And at least according to me, who is his mother, who is not an unbiased source, he's doing pretty well. You know, he's in a regular classroom, he is in with his peers, he can access, you know, extracurriculars and that kind of stuff. So by my standard, I think it was really impactful and really, really important. And when I was going through this, I also thought to myself, I was like, this has really, really significant impact in terms of my profession. Because you know, what are the things that kind of piss us off most as teachers? It's behavior, right? We don't get mad when kids can't read or when they struggle to read. Right? I feel like we sort of have that skill set to be able to look at it as a problem and to be able to understand those things that allow a kid to be successful in reading, and we understand those steps that it takes. But we don't really understand that when it comes to behavior, right? We sort of have these kids and they're like, what the heck are we doing, right? And it's really frustrating. So that is sort of what got me into this, and that's sort of why I'm passionate about this stuff, is because if we can start to understand it like we understand the ability to read or the ability to do math and those progressions and the skill set that kids need to have in order to be successful in their behavior, then we can really start to make some headway. So within my behavior program, I had lots. Am I without any? I don't think I had any who did not have a diagnosis of ODD. There might have been one, but that again is another reason why ODD became really important to me to be successful, is because it's where I lived, right? Like I just went to work every single day, and kids all had ODD, and so I had to figure out pretty quickly how to support these kids. And even now in my position, most of the kids that I see have a diagnosis of ODD. So it's in my life, maybe not in your life, my life, it's very, very prevalent. So we're going to go through what ODD is and some interventions and some stuff that we can do to help kids with what we would consider defiance. So let's start going through some characteristics. The other thing that I will mention is that, like, I am not the only expert in this room when it comes to kids with ODD. So there's lots of experience. So I really do think, like, we're just sort of a group of professionals trying to make our lives a little bit easier. So if you have ideas, if you have thoughts, if you have anything that you think that can sort of contribute to the group, I really do encourage you to say something. I do not know it all. Okay, so let's go over some characteristics. First of all, ODD is considered in the DSM-5 a disruptive behavior disorder. Okay, so that's what its characteristic. And I'm just going to pop through all of these because I know we're tight on time. And there's my source. So this is kind of what we're looking at, and I'll just let you read through it. See some nodding. Look familiar? Everybody got one in mind? You're like, oh, yeah. Yeah. Right. The one thing that I do, however, want to point out with all of these things is that if you look at them, really what they are is an adult's response to that behavior, right? That's what we're looking at here. We're looking at, this is what this kid does, and this is how it makes me feel, right? So within the characteristics of this, like one of the categories is vindictive, right? So that to me is a really good indication of the fact that, and for these guys, this isn't really about what it's working for them, how it is from their perspective. This is about how it is from our perspective. And that's one of the things that we're going to try to flip, is that when we're understanding these kids, we have to understand this behavior in terms of how it works for them and not what it's doing to us. So that's going to be one of our goals for today. The other one is, when I get called in for these kids, most of the time what people are looking for is they won't listen. I can't get them to listen. I ask them to do one thing, they do exactly the opposite thing. They will not do what I ask them to do. How can I get them to listen? And if we could do that, that's what we would do. Every single time. If I could just show up and be like, well, you just boop, 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 and then they will listen. I honestly, actually, no, I wouldn't tell you. I would not tell you. I would sell it on the internet for millions of dollars, and you could find me in Tahiti. That's what would happen if I could figure that out, right? It's just not that easy. If it was, that's what we would do. So the second thing that we're trying to do today is we're trying to figure out where the only behavior you can control is your own. So what are the things that you as an individual, as a staff member, as the grown-up in the room, what are the things that you can do and sometimes not do in order to make that behavior work less well for them? Because the truth of the matter is that we're going to go through this, and when you're in the weeds with these kids, when you're in the conflict with them, there are really very few things that work well when you're actually in the weeds. The goal is stay out of the weeds, right? Don't enter into the conflict with them. They're trying to piss you off, so don't do it. Okay? So those are the two big goals. What can you do? Understand the behavior from the kid's perspective. Okay. So the one thing that I would say for all kids with ODD is that for them, what it is a matter of control. It is their ability to control what they are doing, when they are doing it, with whom they are doing it, and it is them having, again, what I would say is a really extreme amount of autonomy. And because this is a diagnosis, it's gone so far as to be interrupted into their lives, right? This is not something, it is so much that, because we all do this, right? Every single one of us will have that defiance to be like, what, and however you want to justify it. You're like, oh, I should have asked me nicer. Last time you didn't help me, so this time I'm not helping you. We all have these behaviors. It's just not to a point where it interferes with our lives, right? These guys, it interferes with their lives. One other thing I want to point out about this is that this is really the only diagnosis that I have ever seen that is completely contextual, right? You take a kid with ODD and you put him in a room by himself, close the door, and you just sort of watch him, you won't see those behaviors, right? We don't see those things. Whereas if you have another one of those, the disruptive disorders, so something like ADHD, right? That's also in the same category as ODD. You put that kid in a room by himself, and those behaviors still exist, right? You can still see him buzzing around or spacing out or whatever it happens to be. But for ODD, it is completely contextual, right? It comes and it goes based on the context. So that's if we can understand the context of where it's likely and where it's less likely, then we can change things. Okay? So 3 different types of ODD. Number 1, winning at all costs. We're going to go through these in a little bit more specific details. Arguing just to argue. And then this one I call emotional control. They are not siloed, right? It is not just this or just this or just this. almost all of the kids that I've ever met, actually no, that's a lie, all of the kids that I have worked with have had all three mixed in. The goal here is to figure out which is the most prevalent, right? Which one is our number one, which is our gold medalist, and try to intervene from there. So let's talk through these guys. Winning at all costs. Okay. They will not lose this battle. It does not matter what you threaten them with. It doesn't matter what you take away. It doesn't matter any of that kind of stuff. They are going to win. And if something happens that they don't win, often they will come back and make sure they win in the end, right? This is that type where it's like, it doesn't matter, I will win, I'm gonna, okay? So that's our first one. Second one, arguing just to argue. So what they're doing in this one is they are trying to control basically the length of time that they have you and your full attention. Often these ones, they actually don't really make sense. Like you're like, what are we even arguing about? Like that doesn't make sense. And you try to prove your point and they're like, and then you try to prove your point but that's the goal. Is it's not really about winning, it's about keeping you in the argument for long periods of time. And this one, emotional control. This is secret behavior consultant code where they are trying to piss you off. That's what they're doing, right? They are trying to control your emotions. They're trying to push your buttons. That's about it. These ones sometimes can be hard to identify because sometimes they can seem like really extreme empathy. They can seem like they're just like, whatever. You know those ones? They're trying to make you mad. Emotional control. Okay. Are we good so far? Now it's the end of the day on a Thursday. Indoor recesses all week. I get it. Okay. General intervention. So no matter what kind of ODD we're looking at, or sort of defiance we're looking at, these are general interventions. We are now the Swiss. We are neutral. We are neutral at all times. That's it, right? They don't control your emotions, they don't control what we're doing, we are neutral. Because then they are trying to fight with you. They're trying to do that. So when you fight with them, you're giving them what they want. So be neutral. Don't want to fight with you, they're just children, they really are. So don't fight with them. Okay. I know we harp on this to like ad nauseum, the idea of a relationship. And I am not going to beat you over the head with it, but there are a few things that I'm going to say about it. And the first one is that for kids with that defiance, for kids who have that control, who have that label or behaviors associated with it, without this, nothing else matters, right? That strong relationship with the kid is your foundation. And with these kids, again, going back to that very first list that we saw, these kids can often be very, very difficult to enjoy your time with them. It can be hard, right? But if we can't do that, nothing else matters. And I've got one tiny story for you, just in terms of the importance of relationship. So I had one student last year, and she was a really, really difficult student. She had gone through a program, and the junior program that had her did a really incredible job and went from sort of this rates of aggression going from multiple times a day to sort of multiple times a week. So really, really strong improvement. She came to us, and we did lots of work with her, mostly around relationships, mostly around the fact that like when you get to my classroom, you are wanted here. We enjoy having you here. And it's not the only thing that worked, but we actually wound up getting her rates of aggression down to 0. And she did a really, really incredible turnaround. And when I look back on my career, when I am finished and retired, that student will probably be one of the most things I'm proudest of in my career. I am incredibly proud of the work that we did with her. Then, We move on through the year. She's doing incredibly well. It's going swimmingly well. I think I'm such a good teacher, hooray. Things fall apart at home. She comes to school and she hurts one of my staff members actually quite badly. Right? Violence, we see it again. We go through a VITRA process, and in that VITRA process, the relationship with this young lady and her family absolutely crumbled. Right? It was yada yada yada. We're gonna yada 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 that part, but the relationship fell apart. And so all of these interventions that had worked incredibly well for almost a year all fell apart when that relationship fell apart. Without this, nothing else will work. Is it going to get you to the end line? Absolutely not. But nothing else matters without that strong relationship. So for these kids, the ones where, again, it's contextual, there are times and places where they're not being jerks. You got to find those times and those places, and you got to lean into them, right? So whether you're supervising on recess, right? Maybe you go for a walk with them. Right? It's not like you're having fun supervising at recess anyway, right? Like nobody's enjoying that. So you might as well make the best of it. See if you can develop that relationship where that kid really honestly and truly believes that you enjoy them. You want them to be in your class and to be working with them. They know when you're faking it. They absolutely do. So, as I said, it's work. It's a lot of work, and it can be really hard work. But without it, nothing else matters. Nonverbals, we've run through this lots. This is another thing that these kids often have a really good sense of, is your nonverbals. There's a really strong correlation between ODD and trauma, really strong. So if I had $1 million and if I was smarter and worked at a university or what, and this is actually what I would study, is the correlation between ODD and trauma. It's really something. So with these kids, they pick up on this very, very quickly. Again, kids with trauma do the same thing. They've had to read nonverbals in order to keep themselves safe. They have to learn it quickly. So things like tone, and we all know tone, right? It's not what you said, it's how you said it. They know your tone, they understand it. Okay? Volume and pitch. This is another thing that sort of caught me off guard when I was in balance, is that sometimes kids actually don't realize when you're yelling because of proximity and when you're yelling to yell. So if I'm talking to Derek in the back of the room, I am going to raise my voice because he's further away. And sometimes kids actually don't understand the fact that that is the reason why, and it's not that I'm mad. So just keep that in mind for those kids that might have sensitivities to that. They don't always understand that correlation between proximity and your volume. Body language, how you look, how you act. Are you to big movements or small? All of those types of things, they send a message. And basically, it's a safety message as well. It's like, are you safe in this space? Are you wanted in this space? They can tell from how you act around them in your body language. So just try to be cautious and be aware of how it is that you're doing this.
Can I ask, are
Yep.
students who are on the spectrum, where would they fall in that as well in terms of, I know I have students whose volume is, right, you're yelling at me, no, it's just you were way over there, so I want to make sure you can hear me. I don't like it when people, so where do they fall in that?
So in terms of your volume,
Tone and volume and all that,
so kids with autism have a hard time picking up on those things.
Right.
Or I shouldn't say that,
can have a hard time.
can have a hard time on them. James does, right? My James, so he's my oldest, and he has no idea why, and he will be like, stop yelling! And I was like, buddy, you were in the basement. You can't hear me if you're doing that. Whereas my other two, and again, maybe it's just because it's the other two, my other two kids, neurotypical, they do understand that. So I think for those ones, the ones that can't understand it, either it has to be taught explicitly, right? Like, you're far away, so therefore I have to be louder. And it's probably going to have to be taught again and again and again, because it's not what their senses are picking up.
Yeah.
Or you just need to walk over to them. You just need to not yell across the room. So I would say one of those two options are probably your best. Good. Okay. We are going to have to pre-plan some consequences. right? So if things don't go the way that we want them to, and let's be honest, often they don't, right? Pre-planning what you are going to do is a really important step, because we don't want to be doing this in the heat of the moment. So I've got one more tiny story for you. It's a Paul story. It's low-hanging fruit with my husband, so it's easy. I can't remember exactly what happened, but I'll just say this. I'm your behavior consultant. My children would never get in trouble at school. I would never get phone calls home about my children's poor behavior at school. But if I did, they would go to my husband. So I told him, phone Paul at work, he's fine. So my husband gets this phone call, and he is mad about this, and comes home and is having it out with James, and says to him that he is, because the worst thing you can do for James is that take away his screen time. And that is the end of the line. So Paul's in this, he is mad, and he tells James, "You can't watch TV for a month." And so then James gets mad, and James runs away. And we have activities that we have to go to, and they're therapies, and they're expensive. So now I have to go chase him around the neighborhood in order to try to find him to get him to whatever he's doing. And I come back to my husband, and I'm like, "What was that?" And he looks at me, he's like, "Yeah, I just decided that spur of the moment." You don't say. You don't say, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid with the pre-planning of these things, is because sometimes they make you mad, and when we're mad, we don't make good decisions, right? We do things like the equivalent of grounding somebody for a month for something that really shouldn't have been. The other thing that's sometimes really nice about having those expectations pre-planned is that you can plan them out with the kid, right? You don't finish your math, what happens? Right? What is it that you're going to do? And I've got a specific example of one of the things that I used for my kids in balance that I'll share with you in a little bit. The other thing that's not in your handout that I'm going to put it, or that I just put in sort of earlier, if you know there are triggers, if you know that every time I ask this kid to write something, it is a gigantic fight, right? If you know those triggers, having something put in place to reduce them is a really important part. And one way to sort of flip this, and do you know what? No, I'm going to wait till the math example. Remind me to come back to this. Hold that thought, Linda. I'm getting ahead of myself. Pre-planning. I'll go over this when I go over the math examples. Try not to take things away. What that does is it teaches them that you can't be trusted, right? So if it's at all possible, earning extra things is what we want to be doing, right? So let's just say, because again, my class, we went swimming lots. Leslie Pearson is walking distance from the Shaw Center, and so we went swimming lots. And so we did it every Thursday. And for instance, if I were to say, okay, well, we're going swimming, but you were being bad, so you can't come. What that teaches them more than I was being bad, so I shouldn't do that, is you said that I could do something, and now you've said that I can't. So I actually don't trust that you are going to hold up with what you are going to say. So it damages the trust and the relationship more than it impedes the behavior. So one supersedes the other one. Because again, if you think about it, when you were a kid and your teacher decided they were going to teach you a lesson or whatever it happened to be, sometimes it's the lesson that you learned, and sometimes all you learned was your teacher's a jerk, right? That's kind of where we're looking at this. So if at all possible, and it's another reason why these things need to be pre-planned, is because it's easier to take things away, right? You were being a jerk, you're not coming on the field trip. Okay? We don't really have to pre-plan it. If you can have them earn extra things, that works better in terms of your relationship, and it also works better in terms of their motivation to do it. So just consider that. There's also room for flexibility. You don't have to hold on. We don't have to be really rigid with these things. If it doesn't seem right, don't do it. You're smart people. You're professionals. Dignity, right? Especially with your older kids, right? Those social interactions are so important to those kids. And if you're going to fight with them in front of their peers, it can be really damaging to like their social standing. It can be really embarrassing, right? So if you have to have these discussions with these kids, do it privately. Do it somewhere where you can maintain their dignity, right? It's better for you, it's better for them, right? Overall, we want to make sure that those conversations are, again, as private as they can be. Okay. Okay. You can only control you, right? I've said this before. The only person whose behavior you can control is your own. So how you respond to these kids, that is always within your control. Okay? The more behavior you have, the more behavior they will have. So if they start to escalate, and then you start to escalate, and then they start to escalate, and it just keeps feeding itself, it will get worse and worse and worse, right? That's when we go back to you being Switzerland, right? We are neutral. If those kids are starting to escalate, say less. They're not listening to you anyway, right? They're not at a state where they can be rationalized with. Have we seen that, like the lid flipping? Do we know what I'm talking about with that? Yes, okay. So when our lid is flipped, we don't learn, right? We're not listening, we're not in a rational state. Probably what you're gonna do is piss them off further. That's likely what's gonna happen if you keep yipping at them, okay? So if kids were having, at least in my class, if they were having a hard time, we left them. And often I would just kind of sit with them and just be like, you let me know when you're ready to talk. And I once sat with a kid for 3 hours. He sat in his desk, I sat on the couch, and I understand that it's a different program. I understand that that's not going to happen in your grade 4 classroom, that you're not going to sit by yourself with this kid. But just to give you an example of sometimes this is how long it can take. And you don't need to push them, right? Most of our kids have a good enough understanding and verbal repertoire that you can say that to them. You know what, you let me know when you're ready to talk. Has that ever happened to you where you're like, oh, the kid looks calm, and then you walk up to them and you're like, and the kid like loses his crap on you again? Yes, and I did that, I don't even know how many times. And now I was like, oh, he looks like he's calm. Oh, and you try to re-engage, and you try to go back to them because you want that connection. You want them to know that you're there, but all it does is just makes them flip again. So put it in their court. Come and talk to me when you're ready. I'll be here, and then be ready to talk to them when they're ready to talk to you. Right? You don't need to push them into it. If you are starting to lose your patience, you need to leave. First of all, it's good modeling, right? Secondly, this is a professional environment. Like, we're not allowed to yell and scream at kids. We're not allowed to get mad at them. It's not acceptable anywhere in society anymore, right? Like the McDonald's lady who screws up my order 14 times, I'm not allowed to yell at her, right? It's not tolerated. Verbal abuse, how we speak to each other, it has to be common professional. So if you're starting to lose your patience, you need to excuse yourself. As I said, it is good modeling. It's good for them to see, you know what, I need a minute. Go outside, take your minute, become Switzerland again, re-engage. Sound good? In theory? No. Okay. We're gonna try to ignore, or we're gonna try to sidestep any of the arguments that we can, right? If we cannot enter into the argument, that is your very best intervention. Don't do it in the first place. Right? Just as an example, once I had one young man, we were doing some sort of a mapping assignment. We were coloring a map, and I don't know what was going on there, but they were to color the oceans blue. And so he had a blue pencil crayon, and I was like, oh, coloring the oceans blue. And he's like, nope, it's orange. Right? And again, just trying to bait me into an argument because it's obviously very blue. But this one I was like, all right, well, color it orange then. And off we went. So again, it's just that willingness to not enter into the conflict. Don't do it. You can remove yourself from the situation very easily. Somebody needs your help. Oh my goodness, over here. Somebody needs my help. I'll be right back to me. Right? And often that will diffuse it. This one is Tyler's. So we are going over this. So Tyler's my coordinator. The drop by, where you basically just like wander by. You're like, today we're doing the odds. And then you just keep going, because if you're not there, they can't fight with you. So drop by and keep on going. So those are sort of just some general strategies. Are we okay here? Questions, comments, concerns? Other thoughts, other things that you have done that have worked well in terms of not entering into conflict or diffusing, anything like that that you think would be?
Probably just cute, but that was work for the little kids.
All of these things are individual.
Yeah.
They're all for what works for that kid. What works with one kid may not work with another. Humor might be a really great one for some of them in terms of diffusing situations or sort of sidestepping those arguments or whatever it happens to be. Should I work on my wait time? Yeah.
I have a little one who baits with noise. So to ignore the noise, like a repetitive noise, or
Is
pushing
making
of
a repetitive noise?
Yeah. So like, and we actively ignore it for as much as we can until the other kids are starting to be affected by it. So what do you suggest?
You're going to be dissatisfied with my answer.
I want to hear it.
Can you identify the function of that behavior? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Like the trigger.
Know why he's doing it.
Are you talking about B?
Yeah. Where are you?
Is he trying to piss somebody off or is he stimming? What do you think?
Well, I know when it's gonna happen. It's when we're writing. Like that's one big time
Okay.
where it begins. He doesn't want to do what we're doing.
It's a combo with him.
Yeah.
I think some of it is him stimming.
But
Some of it's, he knows that historically he could get removed and that's hard, right? So that's that challenge that
They're very good at what they do,
Yeah.
right? You got to give them that. So specifically what for that one is, I haven't seen it. I don't know what the assessment is, but for all of those really challenging behaviors, that's kind of the process that you have to go through is that like, you know, what is the reason that this kid is doing this? And for these guys, again, that's what we're talking about here, it's control, right? Are they trying to control you? It doesn't sound like that's the case with this young man. So I don't know what the function is and therefore I can give you a not very good answer.
That's
No.
okay.
Okay. Any other questions I can't answer? Great. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to get into a little bit more specific. How are we doing for time? I'll hustle up. Okay, winning at all costs. Okay. Choice is your friend. Right. Control is the name of the game for these guys. We don't want to take that control away entirely. We want to give them that control within boundaries that allow them access to what they need, right? We're not the military. We're not going to like break you down to build you back up or whatever it is. And for most of us, some of these skills are really important to have. We want kids that aren't just going to follow things complacently all the time, right? Like that's not good for them either. They're just kind of on the other end of the spectrum. So choice is a really important thing in order to give them that feeling of control. We want that for them. It's just within boundaries. One of the most important things that I found is that if you can give them whatever you're asking them to do in a way that they can't say no, right? Because if you are like, Dwayne, can you do your math, please? Nope, right? So the no is an option in that one. Whereas if you can deliver that ask in a way that no is not an option. Okay, so Dwayne, you want to do the odds or the evens, right? It's just an example like that where no isn't an option. You still have a choice. You are still within what it is we want to do. We just, the choice is odds or evens. You want to color the oceans blue or you want to color them orange? I don't care. I don't care in any way, shape, or form what color the oceans are, right? So that's another thing to think about is that where you need to pick those battles is that like, do you really care if the oceans are blue? Is it really going to matter to them in a few years' time, right? So if there's ways that you can give them that control and give them those options, it can be really, really effective. When they don't follow through with it, because it is the first few times as we're sort of working through this process, they're going to tell you to F right off, right? So that's when we go back to those pre-planned consequences. And this is my math example, and I'll show you what I did with my guys for math that was effective. First thing was, the number of questions were always highlighted ahead of time. It was never an option for them, and it wasn't an argument because it was just already in your math book, right? So it took that, like, me assigning you a question, that conflict, it took it out of it, right? It wasn't me assigning you it. Yes, it was, absolutely. But it was just highlighted in your book, right? And so it's just like, well, I don't know, I guess it's these ones that you're doing. You let me know if you need help. And I really do prefer a number of questions to a time. When you ask for time, you get time, right? When you ask for work, you get work. Because if I tell you, I want you to work for 20 minutes, lots of our kids, they can figure out that if I just sit there quietly for 20 minutes, my teacher will leave me alone. And they don't necessarily have to do anything. The other thing that happens when you assign something like a number of questions is it puts the control back in their hands. You decide how long it's going to take you to do this. And when we're doing this, and we'll go through this in just a second, it needs to be really, really easy. Really easy. I'll explain that in a second. So, number of questions are highlighted, right? I want you to do, and I had a grade 8 boy, and his number of questions was 2 single-digit addition questions. That's all I asked of him. So, like, that's how easy I'm talking when we're doing this. When they finish it, there needs to be an upgrade to their world. There needs to be some reason for you to do this, right? Because if it's just like drudgery, right, kind of sucks. So for this young man that I was talking about, for him it was basketball, right? You finish these 2 questions, and then we, again, luckily in my situation, we had a basketball court right outside, so we could go outside and play 15 minutes of basketball. Right? So whatever it is for you guys, so whether it's computer time or whatever happens, their life has to get better after they do what you ask. Okay? Once it's assigned, you don't fight about it, right? Do not fight, right? Don't nag them, offer help. It's in their court. First time I did this with this kid sat there for the entire day. Didn't do it. And eventually, and then we came back and he was there again, and the next day. So then there had to be some persistence with us for the first couple of times. But what we're looking for with these guys is for them to figure out, so this is pretty easy. If I just do it, then I get to go play basketball, right? So, and that really was effective with these guys, is that they felt like they had control. They felt like it was worth it for them to do it. And it was pretty quick and easy, right? Do it, move on. Sometimes, we'll go through this one. Sometimes we don't like that, it feels yucky. Sometimes it's like, how can you possibly ask a grade 8 kid to do 2 math questions? It seems unprofessional. It seems like you're just yuck. And I get that, right? It does seem yucky. But what I want you to think of it more is you are teaching them cooperation. You're not teaching them math. You're teaching them that when you do what I ask of you, good things happen. Because frankly, he wasn't doing math before, right? He was doing 0 questions before. So it's not like he was doing math and now I've assigned this and he's not doing math. We went from doing 0 questions to doing 2 questions, which seems like an improvement to me. I didn't fight with him, and he did it in the end. From there, we can start to build. So a couple of things to consider. This has to be differentiated appropriately. The only way it works is that if the kids can find success right off the bat. I'm talking like we're hitting it out of the park first time you try, okay? So whatever assignment you think you're going to try, cut it in half. Cut it in half. Because what we are trying to teach them is cooperation and not necessarily the subject. The subject matter will come as that buy-in happens more and more. The more that you can get them to cooperate with you, the more that we can avoid those conflicts, the more you can add on to it. Once you've got them working, and I promise, like honestly, at least I shouldn't say that. It worked really well for me. If it's not working well for you, you can have Derek phone me and I'll come help you. We'll get you going. I like to say this, once it's working, you can start to add things onto it. You can start to add numbers of questions. You can start to add complexity to those questions. Okay? The one thing I would say for this one is a very fancy term, ratio strain, okay? And I'll give you an example of it. Dwayne. Oh, totally busted on your phones.
No.
I'm joking. I got $1 million for you to do 10 push-ups. Are you gonna do it?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. I got $1,000 for you to do 10 push-ups. You gonna do it?
Sure.
$100?
Yeah. Still pretty good.
$10?
Oh. I did work out this morning.
Oh, it's tired. All right. $1. $1. Okay. There's our ratio strain. Too much work for not enough reward. That's what we're talking about with that, is that all of a sudden it becomes not worth it for them. They know how to get out of it. They've been not doing math for years, right? So if that's the case, if you start adding in things too much, too quickly, too hard, whatever it happens to be, and they start telling you, F off again, this is one thing you need to look at, is the upgrade to their world sufficient to warrant that amount of work? So it's just something to watch for. Good there? Arguing just to argue. This is the one that actually pisses me off the most. This is the one that drives me the most crazy. And maybe it's just a personal thing. Avoid them when you can, right? They want to draw you into it. They want to keep you in that argument, okay? If you can't avoid it, a face-saving exit is kind of what we're looking for here, right? So just a couple of things that, whatever, they're arguing about something and it's obviously wrong and they're just trying to argue with you. Do you know what? Why don't you grab a computer, just look it up for me and tell me what you find, right? They can go do their thing. We can continue on with the class, right? Because you telling them that they're wrong or whatever it happens to be is not going to end the argument. It's going to continue it further. So we need to find a way to basically have a face-saving exit out of that argument. How would you teach it from your perspective, right? If I am so stupid and my ideas are so bad, why don't you come up and tell me what you think, right? Give them an opportunity to. Sometimes we got to keep some boundaries on that one because sometimes we know that can go awry. But it's just, it's an idea for something to do. Well, what do you think about it? I'll tell you. Somebody else needs your help. It's another one of my favorite ones. Just hold on, just for a second. Somebody needs my help. Somebody always needs your help. This is always one that you can use. And then my last one, these are my two very favorite words. Nevertheless, and regardless. This is the stupidest assignment I've ever done in my whole life. Nevertheless, we're going to do it. So here we are. Now, I understand the words, youngest grade I ever taught was grade 5. So these words may not be appropriate for your primary ed kids, right? You might need to find something else. So basically it's like, all right, we're going to do it anyway. It's okay, right? So you're just avoiding the argument. And that's the biggest thing, right? They're trying to keep you into it. You got to cut it off and move on. Emotional control. This is a tricky one, okay? Remaining calm. Making sure that they are not pushing your buttons is your most important thing for this one, okay? Because if you lose your temper, get flustered, get frustrated, whatever it happens to be, even once, it can make that behavior incredibly hard to reduce. When that happens, it basically goes on the same sort of a schedule that, for the reason that many of us golf, right? It's that one beautiful shot that keeps us coming back again and again and again through everything else that you duff into the bush, right? You're looking for that one time, and that one beautiful shot, as I said, will keep you coming back to the golf course many, many times. Another example of that, and again, it's not one that I really like to use, gambling, right? That one win will keep you pushing that button for a long time. And that's what's happening here. That one time that they are successful in making you mad will have them swinging the club, pushing the button, whatever analogy you want to use. So this is a really important one to remember, okay? Neutral. You are Switzerland. I know it's too much words on one slide. I just couldn't take them off. I didn't know what to take off. Don't take the bait, okay? I don't care. Okay. But if you did, what would that look like, right? That's one that you can use, right? You don't need to take the bait. Distraction is also a really important, or a really effective one. Hydration is really key for spelling. Off you go. Why don't you go get a drink, come back, and then we'll be ready for spelling, whatever happens. Distracting, and again, especially with our little kids, you guys are so good distracting them and get them onto something else. If it looks like they're going to escalate, you need to intervene sooner rather than later. This is also another one where we inadvertently teach kids worse and worse behavior. So I'll give you an example of this. So before, Billy, proverbial scale of 1 to 10, okay? Billy had to take to a 4 in order to piss you off, right? Went to a 4, pissed you off, happy every single time. Yay, pissed off my teacher. Now we learn something else, and we are not going to take that bait. We're not going to do it. So Billy goes to a 4 and it doesn't work. So then Billy tries a 5. And then Billy tries a 6 and a 7, and now you've lost your temper. What you have now taught him is that in order for me to get this control that I want, I now have to go to a 7 out of 10. You have increased the magnitude of that behavior inadvertently, and they are going to do that. If it was working and now it's not working, they're going to escalate. And if you enter into that, that's what we've done. It's a shaping procedure. We have shaped that behavior to a higher magnitude than it was before. So be considerate of that as well. That kid might escalate more. And if they are starting to, we have to intervene. We cannot teach them to go to a 7 out of 10 when before 4 used to work, right? Maybe you need to go for a break, right? Maybe you need whatever help, whatever it happens to be, to try to get that kid to re-regulate. We need to do that. You need to make sure that you're not losing your ever-loving mind on them. It's a really important thing. Go for a walk. Go to the sensory room. Play with some sensory. I don't care what it is. Something else to get them to re-regulate. Okay. When the kid is calm, then we try to come back. And we try to come back and figure out what is the actual problem here, right? We try to get them to communicate what it is that they actually needed. So whether it was like, it seems like you were frustrated, identifying emotions. Can you identify how you were feeling? That's a really good strategy. How are you feeling? If you're frustrated, what can we do? Are you fine? Is this too much or is this too hard? Right? That's another thing that can be really important for them to be able to recognize and to verbalize. And that's, again, what we want out of this. We want them to be able to communicate what they're feeling and what they need, so they don't have to act like jerks in order to get what they need. Right? So think about that in terms of your goals, right? De-escalate, then sort out what was the actual problem here. Like what is it that we're trying to do? And then, here we are, a recap. Only person whose behavior you control is you. How you respond has a major impact on how that kid responds. So when you are thinking about this, again, you can't control. We would just make them listen if we could. We can't. So we have to make sure that we're putting those kids, our behavior is putting those kids in the best position to be able to be successful. Nothing else matters without that relationship. It all comes crumbling down. Every bit of it. Don't minimize how important that is. All of these kids, I think without exception, are relationship kids. Behavior is the issue, not the kid. Right? Kids don't come out of the womb like this. They're not broken. They just learn some things to get what they need. And if they can learn those things, they can learn other things. Kid is not the issue. Always. We are professionals, model the behavior you want to see. They don't listen to us very often, but they always watch you. They always watch what you're doing. Prevent what you can. If you know it's a trigger, try to minimize it. Don't fight with children. Don't do it. Okay. And then I'm going to walk you through, I don't think we'll have time for this, but I am going to leave you the very back sheet. Okay. What you're looking at here is basically looking at a prevention plan for kids who have these types of behaviors. First thing to do is identify it. What type of control is the main type of control, right? There might be more than one, so you might have to adjust it a little bit. But if you were to guess one, what do you think is the main type of control? Okay. Second one, building that relationship. What is the context in which we don't see that behavior from that kid? There is a context. Find it, use it, make sure that kid knows that that you like them, that you want them in that class. Okay. Avoiding conflicts. What are some ways that you might be able to do? What is the equivalent of your nevertheless, whatever it happens to be? Yeah. You can always help somebody else. I've been in many of your classes before. There's always somebody who needs help. So it's just things like that. What can you do to avoid those conflicts? Okay? Boundaries and expectations. So this is that pre-planning. What are the things that you can do that will set those boundaries so the kids, again, if we don't follow through with what you're supposed to be doing, what is it that you can take away? Right? Scheduling is also a really important part of that one. That was sort of my most effective one, is that we did our social studies and then it was followed right by phys ed. And for the kids, they loved phys ed. It was like, well, you can go to phys ed as soon as your social studies is done. And it was a pretty good motivator for them because, again, it was ridiculous. It was like write down 6 words or something like that. It wasn't too hard for them. So, motivated them, get it done, we'll go off to phys ed. And then we would go. Okay? Where can you give them voice and choice? Really, really important strategy because we want them to have that feeling of control. We don't want to take that away. Okay? And then the last one is pick your battles. What is the biggest struggle that you're having right now? Is it math? Is it writing? Is it whatever it happens to be? Can you use that idea where it's like we're trying to teach cooperation here, right? We weren't writing before. Might as well write 2 words and not fight rather than write 0 words and have a nice long fight, right? It's an improvement. So pick your area that you want to work on because again, you're not going to fix all things every day. Pick that one area that's maybe the biggest problem and try to focus on that. Questions, comments, concerns?
How do you do this without sending a less positive message to the other kids? Meaning, we don't up rewards necessarily for behavior that we just expect. Like raising your hand when you want to speak, not flirting, or chirping, to distract the people around you so that you're interfering with their learning. So how do you manage that so that it doesn't become that I'm only going to do things when there's a carrot in front of me?
That's how we start behavior. That's not how we maintain behavior. Very few of us need a Smartie to pee on the puppy anymore, right? So the carrot really is an important part of the strategy in terms of getting that behavior going. So I know you're sort of on step 15 when we need to start on step 1. So I understand we want kids to have that intrinsic motivation. We want them to do it because it's the right thing, but right now they're not.
No, I'm not. It's not that kid. I'm thinking of the rest of the kids watching this. So if they know that this person gets extra computer or extra, and now suddenly, because I have kids that will do that, they kind of keep an eye on things and they're very cognizant of the equal has to be the same, rather than you don't need this. You do a good job because you feel good about it, And we have conversations like that, but it.
And I would say just keep doing that. I think kids do well when they can. And I know that tends to be the case where it's like, well, Billy's he gets extra computer time, why don't I? Because in this classroom, everybody gets what they need. And you need something different from Billy. And that's sort of the end of it. Because if they're doing it now, they're likely to continue to do it. If it's a problem, then again, it's something that you can address. But until it's a problem, right now, it's just sort of this idea. If you can't manage it, like if that's what you're saying, is that like all of a sudden all these kids are acting like little jerks because they saw it and they're like, oh, I'd like more computer time or whatnot, then we can deal with that. But until it becomes a problem, as I said, my experience with it is that line. In this class, everybody gets what they need, and he needs something different from you. So off you go. You worry about you. That was enough in my class to be able to sort of have the differences in how those rules are applied dealt with. Do we nail the timing?
Oh, wow, that's impressive. Yeah, thanks for that was fantastic. I was hanging on every word that you were saying, and I think a lot of these things we've been talking about throughout the year, and taking some different learnings, some different pieces that we've covered, and it's really starting to come together, at least for me. And I appreciate the connections to your family and your own kids, because those of us that are parents, we're probably looking at the way that we were interacting with our kids, and
Yeah.
we go say, so that was a nice 15 years ago.
Don't tell Paul that I threw him under the bus.
Absolutely telling Paul tomorrow.
He knows. He knows.
And again, even though it's pieces, I think day one of the school year, Dwayne mentioned, regardless, and nevertheless, and seeing him in action with those, that happens in my office now often, and it does work. Just simple things like that. So all these little nuggets that you've given us, I think we can apply in different ways. And I appreciate that you're that you're telling us how hard this is, especially that emotional piece, and we can only control our own behavior. And the other piece is, in our jobs, we have, especially if we have 30 kids in our class, it is very difficult to wait out a kid for an entire day. And
Yep.
we don't allow ourselves to do that because we think we're not doing our job. And what I'm realizing is that it's a lot harder to do nothing than to try and do everything. And so let's do the hard thing and do nothing in that moment if we know that that nothing is going to keep that kid from the next one.
Right.
And we just have to know ourselves so that we're getting used to that, this change of pace. And we have a lot of EAs here today. We have 10 more in our building. So there are people that we can kind of get to know when we
Yep.
need to, when our emotions, when we can't keep ourselves going. Because it's not possible to be on 100%.
Nope.
It's just not. So, thanks again.
And as always, if you just think of questions later on, I know it's a lot of information and probably too much information at once, but if you're going through and you're like, I don't know about this doesn't make sense, right? I have an email. You can find me. You can absolutely ask me, and I will do my best to hopefully do a better job of answering questions than I did here.
But keep these sheets too. This, like, I would keep a copy of this, and you can fill this.
I
out
will
for
send a
several
copy to
kids.
Derek. I will send so when you lose it, we understand that. You can find another one. Anyway, thanks again for having me.
Thanks.
Enjoy your Thursday. Stay warm.
And Linda, we didn't have to find a bunch of other shirts, or we didn't make
Yeah. Like my trauma informed, and it was 45 degrees in that room. They needed to have a bigger venue. I don't know if I'll do the same one. I've actually done that presentations for lots of staffs now. But thanks. It was hot. It was hot. But it was good. It was nice to have people. And that's what I thought too. I was like, it's pretty impressive that we have. Because honestly, they could have chosen to go disc golf. Right? Like, and I was like, again, I made a joke. I was like, it's just too hot for disc golf. It was